Quentin Kael's first mistake was assuming the emergency tether line was secured. The second was assuming the alien knew what a wrench was. Hand me the no, not that. The other one. The blue one. Looks like a hammer had a baby with a crowbar, Quentin said, floating upside down relative to the massive power conduit panel of the Verdari observation station. The alien beside him tall, translucent-skinned, and as jittery as a caffeinated meerkat gripped a long, curved tool between two webbed hands. This? It asked. That's a spatula, Quentin muttered, checking the magnetic boots clamped to the hull. Why do you even have a spatula in a maintenance kit? The alien tilted its head. For surface adhesion manipulation. Quentin blinked. You mean scraping burnt goo off the reactor vent? Yes. Right. Never mind. Just hold still. I need 30 seconds to reroute, the station groaned, a deep metallic shudder that echoed through the hull. Something exploded in the conduit's inner chamber, and a pulse of kinetic force sent Quentin tumbling into open space. The tether snapped taut, then snapped, period. Before he had time to curse, he was spinning, tumbling through the dark void with no control, the station shrinking behind him like a punctured balloon. Kael detached. A voice crackled in his helmet. Repeat, human maintenance specialist has detached. Confirm. Quentin twisted his body, trying to stabilize. Yeah, I'm aware. I'm in freefall. No jets, no tether. Can we skip the confirmation and work on retrieval? Rescue drone launch in progress. Estimated intercept in 4 minutes. I won't last 4 minutes if I drift into the reactor wake. We recommend you remain calm. Yeah, well, I recommend you learn about sarcasm. The rotation was slowing, but not enough. He reached for his tool belt, grabbed the only thing with enough mass, a spanner the size of his forearm, and hurled it in the opposite direction. It gave him a nudge, enough to slow the spin. Not stop it, but enough to focus. All right, he muttered, breath fogging the inside of his helmet. Options. Think. He had no jetpack, no tether, no maneuvering thrusters. What he did have was a half-empty oxygen tank, a broken wrist he could feel the throbbing already, and a whole lot of empty space. Quentin took a deep breath, letting the panic press against the inside of his skull, then pushed it down. Kael is not panicking, the alien's voice said. Thank you for the narration. You are rotating at 3.7 revolutions per second. Still not helping. Another voice came through the comm, this one calm, clipped, and unmistakably Verdari command. Human Quentin Kael, we advise you to enter stasis mode. Reduce oxygen consumption. Quentin spat into his helmet. Not a chance. I've got an idea. He reached behind him, grabbed the emergency patch foam from his belt. The stuff was designed to seal small hole breaches, expand and harden instantly. He ripped the nozzle off, pointed it sideways, and squeezed. The foam blasted out, pushing him the other way. The rotation slowed more. His wrist flared in pain. He ignored it. Changing vector, he said. I might be able to slingshot back across the station's gravity shadow. That is not recommended, the alien said. You are not designed for vacuum maneuvering. Neither are you, but here we are. He emptied another canister of foam. It gave him just enough push to angle back toward the station. Not directly, he was still drifting too far, but enough to intersect the flight path of the retrieval drone. Kael, your vitals are spiking. We detect bone trauma. Yeah, he hissed. I broke something. I'll live. Probability of survival remains below 60%, said Verdari command. I've worked with worse odds. By the time the drone reached him, Quentin was barely conscious. The cold was creeping in past the suit's insulation. His fingers were numb. He was muttering to himself in half-coherent syllables. The drone latched onto his suit, stabilized his trajectory, and reeled him in like a fish on a line. When he was hauled back into the airlock and peeled out of the suit, the station medtechs were already waiting. One of them scanned his wrist. Fracture confirmed. Radius. Possibly ulnar. We need imaging. Fine, Quentin muttered. Just get me a blanket. You should not be alive, the alien technician said. Yeah, Quentin said, teeth chattering now. That seems to be a recurring theme. 3 weeks later, with his wrist in a cast and his pride mostly intact, Quentin sat in a debriefing room aboard the Verdari flagship Vexel Prime. The room was sterile, brightly lit, and occupied by 9 different species. Most watched him with a mixture of suspicion and awe. The Verdari commander, a tall figure with ridged skin and dark eyes, addressed the room. We convene this session to examine the anomaly of human survival instinct, specifically in unprotected vacuum conditions. I was in a suit, Quentin said, raising his good hand. Minimal propulsion, no guidance, no rescue beacon. You should not have survived. Well, I did. So what are we trying to figure out here? A gelatinous being from the Sci-Fi coalition pulsed red. Humans lack natural armor. Internal organs are exposed to rapid decompression. Your species is known for fragility. Quentin tapped his cast. Tell that to my wrist. The Verdari commander turned to him. Your actions were deemed reckless. I call it resourceful. You used a repair foam as propulsion. Because it worked. Another alien leaned forward. It had a flat face and wide, blank eyes. Had you missed the drone intercept, you would have drifted into the reactor field. You were aware of this. Yeah. You proceeded anyway. Quentin shrugged. What else was I going to do? Curl up and wait to die. Silence settled in the room. Finally, the Verdari commander spoke again. Your species has been involved in 37 recorded incidents of survival in conditions deemed terminal. This is the first observed instance of surviving open space without propulsion or guidance. Guess I'm unlucky enough to be first. No, said the Sci-Fi. You were dangerous. Quentin frowned. Because I didn't die? Because you didn't give up. Word spread fast. Over the next month, reports came in from across the sector. Human miners on the ice moon of Tau Rex survived a transport collision by sealing themselves in an ore container and using its heating coils to stay alive for 63 hours. A shuttle pilot crash landed on a vacuum world and built a shelter out of carbon paneling, surviving until rescue arrived 6 days later. Every time, the same question circled among the Galactic Union. How? How did a species with no exoskeleton, no redundant organs, and a laughably inefficient metabolism keep surviving situations that should have killed them? Quentin became the unofficial poster boy. Not by choice. He was reassigned to a diplomatic science vessel, the Far Watcher, as a human consultant on survival protocols. I'm not a survivalist, he told Captain Jazari, a three-eyed creature with a temperament bordering on obsessive cleanliness. You survived. That is qualification enough. Quentin sighed. You know that's not how science works, right? Human methods are unconventional. We seek to understand them. Great. So I'm a lab rat. You are a living anomaly. 6 weeks into the mission, the Far Watcher was struck by a micrometeorite storm while passing through the Fringewind expanse. The hull was damaged, one section depressurized. A Verdari technician was trapped behind a stuck bulkhead, oxygen leaking fast. The rest of the crew debated the options. None were viable without risking more lives. Quentin didn't wait. He grabbed a pressure suit, loaded a bag with sealant patches, and crawled into the maintenance conduit. It was barely wide enough for his shoulders. His cast had come off the week before, but the wrist still ached. He squeezed through, patched the secondary airlock seal from the inside, and manually unjammed the bulkhead using a pry bar and pure stubbornness. The technician was unconscious when he reached him. Quentin dragged him out, sealed the breach, and collapsed in the corridor. When the med team arrived, Quentin was already sitting up, gasping. You're a fool, Jazari said later. Probably. You risked your life again. Yeah. That's kind of what we do. Jazari leaned back, eyes narrowing. Your species lacks caution. No. We just get real creative when we're desperate. By the time the Far Watcher returned to Union space, a new directive had been issued. Effective immediately, all survival training programs for non-human species were to include human case studies. Quentin's incident at the observation station became mandatory reading. The Galactic Union no longer questioned whether humans could survive in space. They wanted to know how they kept doing it. Quentin didn't have an answer. He just knew what he'd always known. When it comes to staying alive, humans don't always play smart. But they play hard. And sometimes, that's enough. Quentin winced as the medical scanner passed over his ribs yet again. The machine gave a faint chime, followed by an agitated series of clicks from the attending Curie physician. Its long, translucent tendrils stiffened in sequence as it examined the readout. That's the third time you've scanned me, Quentin said, shirt unfastened and half stuck to the gel pads on his chest. Is the machine broken, or are you just hoping the bones rearrange themselves for your convenience? The machine is functional, the Curie answered, its voice like pebbles rustling in water. Your thoracic integrity is not. Yeah, I figured. Hurts when I breathe too deep. Also when I laugh. Or sneeze. Or exist. You possess at least 2 fractured ribs. Possibly 3. There is internal bruising. You should be under sedation. I'm fine. You walked from the airlock to the infirmary without assistance. Well, the lift was out. Again, the curry's tendrils flared in a ripple of pale blue, which Quentin had come to associate with disbelief. You declined the stretcher. I prefer my dignity vertical. You are injured. Still vertical. It turned away, muttering something in curry dialect as it prepared the bone stabilizer. The device looked suspiciously like a pastry injector, and Quentin never quite trusted any implement that hissed before it touched skin. The door slid open, and Captain Jazari entered without ceremony. Her outer eye scanned the room. The middle one focused on Quentin, and the third tracked the medical tech's hands. Human, she said, not bothering with a greeting. Explain the corridor report. You breached a locked compartment during an emergency containment protocol. I didn't breach it. I unjammed it. There's a difference. You used a torque bar to override a security failsafe. It was stuck. It was sealed for containment. There was someone in there. Jazari stepped closer, her triple gaze narrowing. The technician was not your responsibility. Quentin exhaled slowly. Neither was the foam sealant, or the conduit repair, or the wrench you all call a thermal alignment lever. But if something needs doing, I do it. The Kari inserted the stabilizer against his ribcage. It clicked, and Quentin hissed through his teeth. You have a pattern, Jazari said. You disregard established procedure. You improvise without consultation. You place yourself at risk without authorization. I don't recall signing over my survival instinct to your chain of command. You undermine operational cohesion. I keep people alive. Jazari didn't respond for several seconds. Then, finally, she turned to the Kari. Will he be mobile? The Kari's tendrils flexed. Mobility is technically possible. Ill-advised, but not impossible. Good enough, Jazari said. You're being summoned. Now, Quentin asked. I just got my ribs zapped. Now, the Union Council has arrived early. I'm not exactly presentation ready. They're not interested in aesthetics. Quentin gingerly pulled his shirt closed, wincing as the fabric brushed his side. Fine, but I'm not sitting through another round of your species is a liability speeches. I've heard enough of those for one lifetime. Jazari gave a brief nod. They're not here to criticize. They want to observe. Observe what? Your decision-making process. Wait, they want to watch me think. Precisely. 2 hours later, Quentin stood in a dimly lit chamber aboard the Farwatcher's upper deck, under the scrutiny of 6 council observers. They sat in a half-moon arrangement, each in their own environmental field. The Meraki delegate floated in a nutrient gel chamber. The Varnic diplomat perched on a gravity-reversed platform, body suspended like a coiled ribbon. The only other human in the room, a silent analyst named Ortega, sat in the back with a data tablet and refused to make eye contact. A simulated environment projected around them. It displayed a rotating orbital platform with multiple failure points marked in red. A timer counted down in the corner. Jazari stood off to the side, arms crossed. You will be given a hypothetical scenario. You must respond as you would in reality. The simulation is adaptive. Your responses shape the outcome. Quentin raised an eyebrow. So it's a game? It is a diagnostic. Same thing, just with more judging. A voice, filtered through the simulation system, explained the parameters. An orbital mining platform had suffered a cascade failure due to micro-impacts. Communications were down. Power was fluctuating. 3 sections were cut off from the main reactor. Life support was failing in one of them. There were only enough emergency supplies for one zone. 2 bypass routes were possible, but both had structural risks. Begin, the system said. Quentin studied the layout. First, I'd reroute auxiliary power from the cargo arm. It's redundant and drains less than the main boom. That would destabilize the docking ring, said the Varnic. Only if you don't counterbalance with the tether winches. You've got 4. Run a staggered draw, and you'll hold integrity. You assume you have time, said the Meraki. Not assuming. Prioritizing. You don't save anyone if the whole ring falls apart. The simulation updated as he worked. One of the zones began to decompress. He rerouted flow through a maintenance shaft, then redirected coolant from the secondary feed line. There, he said. That buys you 30 minutes. Enough to get the crew out. You abandoned the central control node, the Meraki said. Because it's already lost. No point wasting effort on a dead section. You chose to sacrifice data archives. They're not breathing. The simulation ended. The timer stopped. Jazari looked at the observers. None spoke immediately. Finally, the Varnic delegate said, "You accepted loss as a given." Instantly. "Because sometimes you lose things. That's not failure. That's triage. You ignored standard rescue patterns. Because they wouldn't have worked in time. You used systems outside their intended purpose. Because they were available. You made decisions without consensus. Because consensus takes too long when people are dying." The room was quiet again. Then the Meraki pulsed a soft grain. "This is consistent." With what? With every recorded interaction. Humans prioritize survivability above structural preservation. You treat protocol as optional. I treat it as a suggestion. When it works, great. When it doesn't, I improvise. Jazari didn't interrupt. She watched the exchange with something between interest and wariness. The observers conferred in low tones, each in their own frequency. The human analyst in the back finally spoke, voice low. "Council has reviewed over 40 human emergency responses across 8 sectors. None follow standard frameworks. Yet statistically, your success rate exceeds 70%. Quentin looked at him. "So what do you want me to say? That we're unpredictable? We are. That we're reckless? Sometimes. But we survive." "That's the point." The Varnic uncoiled slightly. "You adapt by disregarding structure. We adapt by using what we have. Structure's great until it gets in the way. Then it's just another obstacle." Jazari turned to the council. "Are your observations complete?" "For now," the Meraki said. Quentin exhaled. "Good. Because I need painkillers and about 4 hours of horizontal nothing." Later, in the ship's auxiliary mess less crowded than the main galley and marginally more tolerable, Quentin sat nursing a lukewarm mug of something the Verdari called enhanced hydration broth, which tasted like damp insulation. Jazari joined him, carrying a tablet with a list of upcoming system drills. "They're adding you to the training index." "Me. A categorized profile. Your responses will be studied, simulated, replicated." He stared at her. "You're turning me into a lesson plan. Your methods are unorthodox, but effective. You know what this means, right? Some poor bureaucrat is going to have to write improvised propulsion using repair foam into an official procedure." Jazari tilted her head. "They already have." He laughed, winced, and clutched his side. "I hope they add a warning label. Human solutions may cause injury, disorientation, or unintended heroics." Jazari tapped at her tablet. "They've also requested further observation. Of me, of your colleagues." "Which ones?" "All of them." Quentin leaned back, groaning. "You realize what you've done?" Jazari raised an eye ridge. "Enlighten me." "You've unleashed a wave of humans who now know they're being studied for how weirdly good they are at not dying. You'll never get peace again." Jazari considered this. "Perhaps. But we may finally understand how your species continues to defy statistical projections." He sipped the broth again, made a face, and set it down. "Here's a hint. We don't think about the odds. We just think about what's next." Jazari didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. They had seen it now. Not just the improvisation. Not just the stubbornness. The refusal to quit. And that, more than any protocol, was what they wanted to understand. The Farwatcher's climate systems had been on the fritz for 5 days, which meant the entire ship hovered stubbornly between damp locker room and soggy greenhouse. Quentin had taken to rolling his sleeves and muttering about mildew as he moved through the corridors, ribs still tender under the med wrap bracing his torso. He'd half considered asking for a reassignment to a ship with more insulation and fewer conversations about thermal equilibrium zones. But the thought of being stuck on a vessel full of humans again didn't appeal either. At least out here, he was an anomaly. Back home, he'd just be another technician with duct tape and no sense of caution. Jazari summoned him to the diplomatic chamber again. The last time, he'd been asked to walk through a theoretical landslide scenario involving subterranean methane vents and a stranded team of CERN biologists. He'd made it work using a collapsed hover crate, 3 heat coils, and a loose tarp. Jazari had said nothing afterward, just recorded the entire thing with a neutral expression and filed it under Case Study, Human Logic Chains. This time, the chamber was already occupied when Quentin arrived. 3 beings stood around the central lens table, their forms backlit by the soft glow of the interface. One was an Ovlin, tall and cloaked in a sheath of iridescent mesh that shimmered like oil on water. Next to it, a squat, heavily shelled Drazik adjusted a breathing valve with a faint clicking noise. The third, a lanky Cesare, had its limbs folded into an angular pose that suggested either deep contemplation or chronic joint stiffness. Cesare didn't look up from the console. "You're late. I had to reroute a coolant loop in Section 4. It was either that or enjoy another hour of subtropical fog in my bunk." The Drazik turned, voice muffled through its breathing mask. "You rerouted the loop yourself?" "No one else was doing it," Quentin said, stepping closer. "Can we skip the part where I get told that was reckless?" The Cesare's eye clusters rotated toward him. "We've brought you here because the Council has issued a final evaluation." Cesare tapped the control panel, and a holographic schematic of a derelict cargo freighter flickered into view. This vessel was discovered adrift near Void Corridor 9. No active transponder. No life signs. No distress signal. But its flight logs indicated had a human crew. Quentin frowned. "Any signs of what happened?" "Minimal. The ship appears to have experienced multiple system failures. Life support was offline for at least 30 hours. Survivors? We don't know yet." A boarding team found signs that someone survived longer than the data suggests. Makeshift heat sources, recycled water systems, emergency rations cannibalized from non-standard supplies. "Sounds like someone got creative." Cesare nodded. "Exactly. And your task is to review the evidence and confirm whether it aligns with known human survival patterns." "You want me to reverse engineer what they did?" "Yes. From the inside." The Drazik shifted its weight. "You will board the vessel. Alone. Observation only." Quentin raised both eyebrows. "Observation?" "I'm not a forensic analyst." "We're not asking for a report," Cesare said. "We want to see what you do when placed in the same situation. How you interpret the environment. What you notice that we don't." The Cesare tilted its head. "You will be monitored, but not assisted." Quentin exhaled, jaw working. "You're trying to prove whether this was instinct or luck." Cesare's expression didn't change. "You've made a career out of luck." He nodded slowly. "All right, I'll go. But if I find any more vacuum frozen meat packs disguised as protein bars, I'm filing a complaint." 3 hours later, he was suited up and drifting through the airlock of the derelict freighter. The ship was barely holding pressure. His helmet hissed as it adjusted to the stale atmosphere inside. The interior was dark, lit only by the emergency strips along the bulkheads. Bits of charred wiring dangled from the ceiling, and the smell of scorched electronics filled his nostrils even through the filter. He switched on his shoulder lamp and moved forward, boots clanging gently on the deck. The signs of struggle were immediate: makeshift insulation pads lining the walls, a pile of torn-up thermal blankets fashioned into a crude sleeping nest, even a power cell jury-rigged to a heating coil embedded in the floor. Quentin crouched next to the coil and examined the wiring. Stripped from the auxiliary comms panel. Not bad. He followed the lines with a gloved finger. They used a bypass fuse from the NAV console. That's not standard. That's desperation. He moved into the galley, where the real ingenuity hit him in the face literally. A tripwire, made from taut filament and suspended utensils, clinked as he ducked just in time. He laughed softly. Booby traps. Cute. Inside the refrigeration unit, he found what he expected. Water packs melted into a basin, with a heating pipe wrapped around them and a vent from the waste processor feeding steam underneath. Efficient. Gross. But efficient. The insulation's not uniform. They were rationing materials. Someone was trying to hold on. In the forward cabin, he found the answer scratched into the wall with a tool handle, a crude calendar of days marked in groups. 42 tallies. At the end, a note carved deep enough to dent the hull. Not giving up. Quentin stared at it for a long time. Then he glanced up at the overhead recorder drone hovering silently nearby. "Yeah," he said. "That's us." When he returned to the Far Watcher, he was silent during decompression. Cesare waited just beyond the airlock, hands clasped behind her back. Quentin stepped out, peeling off his helmet. "One person survived for almost 6 weeks," he said. "They weren't trained. They weren't equipped. But they adapted. Every single day." Cesare nodded once. "Did you find remains?" "No. They're gone. Probably floated the emergency pod out once the beacon activated. But they left a message." He handed her a copy of the hull inscription. She read it, then looked back up at him. "That's what you want to understand, right?" he said. "Why we keep going. That's your answer. It's not a system. It's not a protocol. It's just that we don't stop." Cesare didn't answer. She stepped aside as the Drazik and Cesare entered the chamber behind her. The Drazik stared at the inscription. We have sufficient observation. The Council will submit new survival training protocols. Human data will be considered core material. Quentin blinked. You're standardizing human desperation. No, said the Cesari. We are acknowledging it. Jazari looked at him. You've done what no simulation could. You confirmed it's not just you. It's your species. Quentin exhaled. So that's it. You believe us now. The Drazik's breathing mask clicked. We do not simply believe. We have recalibrated our assumptions. Quentin looked around the room at the aliens who'd watched him stumble through disasters, shift his way through vacuum, and now crawl through a ghost ship to piece together the story of someone just like him. He felt, for once, no need to explain himself. Later that cycle, back in his bunk, he lay flat for the first time in days. The ribs still ached, but not enough to matter. He stared at the ceiling panel, the recycled air hissing gently through the vent above. Across the ship, new training modules were being uploaded. Ones with his name on them. Ones that would teach other species how to survive the impossible. He chuckled softly. Not giving up, he whispered. And for once no one argued.